I should introduce myself first of all. My name is Christine Lüttich. I'm part of the initiative Adopt a Revolution, which usually nowadays, end of 2019, provokes a lot of irritated laughter and sarcasm. People always telling me, like, which revolution do you still want to adopt? But we still believe in the cause, and looking also at the last months, what is happening in Iraq, in Iran, in Lebanon, but also in Chile and many other countries around the world, it seems to be very up to date. So I'm feeling much better right now again and saying I'm coming from an initiative that is called Adopt a Revolution. And this event was basically the idea of the person who's busy still with setting up the microphone. Okay. It's going to be a great night. Jakob Weingärtner, and I really want to thank you for that, because Jakob, basically, you will get to know him a bit better tonight, is the author of the feature Königreich des Schweigens, The Kingdom of Silence, which is basically a radio feature we are going to hear parts of, and where many of the protagonists that are on the stage, but also in the audience tonight, and are around in Germany, have taken the courage to speak up about their torture experience. So this was a joint event, and the question we had a little bit was to say, okay, how can we talk about torture without making it something that is just going back to the past, that is being just about the personal, individual experience, but also how can we frame this as a collective experience for a collective struggle that is basically an uprising, that is really a wish for a struggle and a movement of social and political change. And so torture, unfortunately, as you all know, is a key instrument of the rule by the Assad regime. And more than 100,000 people have been tortured in Syria since 2011, and it is ongoing. Tens of thousands have died due to this. But torture does not only traumatize people on an individual level, it also does this on a collective level, because that's the goal. It is, in the view of the worldwide movements against authoritarianism rule, which are subjected to the most brutal repression in many places, today more than ever urgent to ask the question, how can we as social and political movements basically overcome this experience? How can we remain capable of action and of fight for the political and social visions for the future? And this is somehow the difficult task that all the people on the panel, but also with you as an audience, we want to try to accomplish tonight, to talk and discuss how can we still remain active and not to have this act of torture basically also break the struggle. Especially with the scattering around of the Syrian diaspora, it has become more and more difficult to organize as a collective movement. At the same time, we see in the recent month more and more voices in of German politicians demanding to look at whether Syria is really unsafe anymore, or whether people could be sent back. So very recently, there was the conference of the Ministers of Interior that took place several weeks ago. And they were basically really discussing for the first time to weaken the deportation stop that was imposed for Syrians, bringing this up with the usual suspect, the usual motive of saying, maybe criminals should be sent back to Syria, as if human rights standards wouldn't apply to people who have committed crimes. And rather than sentencing them and putting them into jail here in Germany, they started to discuss whether these people could be sent back, could be deported. So this is why also they tried to advance a claim to say Assad is not a great guy, he's a war criminal, he's someone who's responsible for crimes against humanity, but still maybe large sections of Syrians are not affected by that. And so one could basically break a deal, do a deal with Assad as a regime. And so hardly anyone in Syria dares to talk about torture also and enforce disappearance. And this is the more and more important because more and more areas are under the control of the regime. So Syria is somehow again on the way of becoming a kingdom of silence again. And this is why we decided to kick off this first talk tonight. And it is really for us the idea of kicking off a first talk tonight. So what we would like to do over the next year, and we would like to invite all of you, is to maybe continue this debate over the next year in a similar setting where we try to discuss also in various forms and maybe with more specific questions how we could deal with this experience, and also to find a room where we could gather between different struggles and different fights of different communities. And like a witness, and I like this quote very much in the feature of Jakob, basically said, Hope for a better future is the basis of our existence, and it is precisely this confidence that unites everyone that the torturers want to systematically destroy. So tonight we want to discuss this, and I'm very happy to exchange on this with a very rich and diverse panel. So we have on the very left side from your perspective, Abir Farhoud, who's a Syrian artist, also an activist who has been also submitted to torture and is luckily here today to talk with us. And she's very much engaged also in community work. We have next to her Pirko, shit, I forgot your family, who's a psychologist and psychiatrist. Is this correct? Psychotherapist, who is also working on a daily basis with people who have endured torture, so who is going to talk about his experiences and work also. Then we have on the right side, I think half of you know him, Yassin Haj Saleh, very famous author, opposition figure, writer, and also someone who has endured 19 years of detention.
Unfortunately not, 16.
No, 16, only 16. Makes such a big difference. And still smiling. Okay. And then on the left-hand side, I have Melania Melis from Chile, and Santiago Abram from Argentina, who are going to join us in the second part of the talk. And Jakob Weingartner, I never know basically. Is it Gärtner or Gartner? Okay, who is the author, as I already told you, about of the radio feature Kingdom of Silence. Before we start off, we will start off basically with a small part of the feature that was premiered just a week ago.
Die Revolution hat die Tore des Königreichs des Schweigens weit aufgerissen. Auch wenn unser Land zerstört ist und die Welt uns im Stich gelassen hat, ihr Echo ist immer noch zu hören. Bis heute tragen wir die Zeichen der Schläge und Verbrennungen an unseren Körpern. Doch das sind nur unsere Körper. Ich habe eine Nachricht an meine Folterer. Ich bin jetzt in Deutschland und ich berichte allen, was ihr getan habt. Ihr habt meinen Willen nicht gebrochen. Ich bin stärker als je zuvor. Ihr seid die Verlierer.
Du trittst dem Königreich des Schweigens mit einem Imperium der Hoffnung entgegen. Alle haben dieselbe Nachricht. Sagt unseren Familien, dass sie nicht kapitulieren dürfen. Nur wenn wir vergessen werden, dann war alles umsonst.
Okay, kannst du es hier auswählen? So basically the person says the revolution has opened up the gates of the kingdom of silence. And although our country is destroyed and the world has forgotten about us, its echo is still here, and it's still we can still listen to it. We still bear the signs of incendies and of beatings on our bodies, but this is just our bodies. And I want to say to my torturers the following: I'm now in Germany, and I want to report about everything that you have done. You haven't broken my free will. I'm stronger than ever before. You are the losers. And then there's a second person who said, you enter the kingdom of silence and you hold in yourself an imperium of hope. And in prison, everybody had wanted to pass the same message. And the message was to our families, we can continue to live as long as we are not forgotten. Otherwise, everything would have been in vain. And for me, this was a very strong quote because it basically showed also the need to talk about torture, although it is a very difficult subject. And I wanted to kick off with Jakob, not because he's the white person and he's the author, but simply because it was really the question for me, why did you decide for over 2 years to work on such a feature and to talk about this subject of torture? What was your motivation behind that?
Well, my motivation, maybe my personal motivation is that I am, of course, I have forefathers who were either for or against Hitler. So I have my father, a pretty old father. He was still he was forced to join the Nazi youth, the Hitler youth, and my grandfather was he was resisting against Hitler. So I think that's kind of my personal my personal motivation to do this feature. And on the other hand, I am not only a filmmaker, but I do lots of radio. And what I found interesting about Sednaya, this torture prison in Syria, is that people there cannot see. So they are forced to look at a wall all day long, and their only connection to the environment is their hearing. So they kind of, all their knowledge is transported by hearing. So I thought, wouldn't it be great to do a radio feature and use the memories that are always being transported by hearing as a starting point for a reconstruction of this place, this kind of non-place. And the idea, of course, is to break the barrier that the Assad regime has formed around Sednaya, which is not only a physical barrier, but it's also a barrier of knowledge. So this was the idea, and then it was just great to do it for a German public radio, because a lot of people, like 80,000 people, listen to one when the feature is broadcasted. So yeah.
Okay. So there's also very strong personal motivation behind that, basically.
Definitely.
Okay. And I think this is interesting. Maybe this is a good handover to you, Yasin. You can use the red mic if you like to. Is it on? Yes. Okay, great. Because, I mean, this is something quite interesting. We have been working as ADOPT for, I think, around 8 or 9 years, trying to get out to the world what is happening, basically amplifying the demands and also the thousands and thousands of witnesses and reports and descriptions that have been written by so many Syrians about what is happening inside Syria. Still, people tend to belittle what is happening inside Syria. They tend to say that torture is not a systematic approach. So you told me that you would like to talk in the beginning very much also about the different kinds of torture that are applied in Syria and how it is used basically as a strategy to divide and rule by the Assad regime.
Well, it is not, first of all, good evening, Masal Khair, Guten Abend. It is not only systematic, actually, it is an essential component of the Assad regime. Syria can be labeled quite justly as a state of torture. Torture is the method of ruling the Syrians, and I don't think that what you mentioned, Christine, that 100,000 were tortured may be far bigger number, I think. Only according to Amnesty International, there are 120,000 in jail now, and maybe according to them, up to the end of 2016, up to 13,000 were killed under torture. I think everybody knows something about Caesar's photos, 5,000 images of maybe around 8,000 people who were killed, and yeah.
Maybe just to explain quickly, Caesar was a photographer who was basically working to document the killing machine of Assad inside one of the most notorious intelligence branches in Syria, and he decided to defect and smuggled out these images. Just a small background.
But I would like to focus more on the number. We cannot know the number of the people who were tortured in Syria, but maybe the most interesting thing that I have never seen in UN or human rights documents, that the number of people who passed through security experiences. I mean, the ones who were summoned to the security headquarters, threatened or stayed for hours every day for weeks, to instill fear in them, or the ones who stayed for a few days, up to the ones who stayed for years, or the one who disappeared, who were killed in the torture. I believe that every single Syrian have a security experience. So this is the most important thing. It is not the number of political prisoners or the prisoners' security, the people who were taken to security. It is the number of people who have this fearful experience. And when we talk about the kingdom of silence, and we have another expression, famous expression in Syria, the wall of fear. The kingdom of silence is walled with the wall of fear, which is a wall within individuals as well as a wall that separates them from each other. I will not go long about this, but let me define torture according to the Syrian experience. I was, you mentioned that I was in jail, and I have fortunately, not very destructive experience of torture. So I think torture is a strategy to go beyond your physical boundary as a human being, to trigger sort of a civil war within you between your high commitments towards your comrades, towards your friends, towards your fellow citizens, and your safety, your physical safety, your survival. And so it is when you prioritize your high commitments, you may pay your life. So you have to find a way out of this, of these two rights of yours. You have to be committed to your friends, to your comrades, and at the same time to be safe physically. So this is the thing. We Syrians have never been able to enjoy these two rights at the same time. Our ethical and high commitments towards our friends, our comrades, and our right to be safe physically, not destroyed. We have experienced at least four forms of torture. This is very important because the word torture can be very general. So we have the first thing, interrogatory torture. They torture you, they beat you, you are inflicted, they use tools of torture to get information from you about your friends, your organization, your comrades, the people you cooperate with. And this is when you are first arrested. It is systematic. Every single person, man or woman, will suffer from this. The second is, and I'm trying to be brief, the second is humiliatory torture. Fortunately, I spent only 1 year in Tadmor prison, and the torture there was just for humiliation. They were not interrogating us. It is just to instill fear, and they know that this will be told someday to the Syrians, and this will help them building the wall of fear. So humiliatory torture, especially in Tadmor and then in Sednaya, in my days in Tadmor. The third is...
Tadmor is basically Palmyra in English, just for those who are not Arabic speaking.
The third is exterminatory torture, and we have seen this in my generation, mostly against Islamists, and now against the people of the revolution. So here, torture is a method of killing people. They are not killed under torture by chance, they are killed by torture. So there's a paradox why they are doing all this to torture people when they would kill them in the end. In the Nazi context, there's a debate about this, and it is most probably to condition the torturers themselves to make them torturers, to reduce them to torturers, to tools of torture. Then there is a fourth form of torture. You can call it punitive torture. Torture as punishment. And when I was in jail, I was punished 2 times physically. I am not talking about Tadmor, and I'm not talking about interrogation. I'm talking of being punished because of something, or because of nothing, actually. So you are beaten because they didn't like the way you are talking, the way you are acting, the way you
So submission,
exist.
Basically, also.
Yeah, it is like this. It is to condition us as to show more conformity to the rules of jail.
And maybe Abir, this is a good. Maybe we can hand over the mic to Abir. Thank you, Yassin, because I think, yes, in general, we tend to mix up these kind of different levels of torture. And one thing that we rarely talk about, or quite often when we think about the use of torture, especially in Western world, it is to say, okay, there is a certain means to get information. So we do very rarely think that this is to simply, okay, there might be partly the goal of humiliation, but mostly it is to get information, then this would stop. But you have also been subjected, basically, to torture, and I don't know how much, I didn't want to go too much into detail what you experienced, but much more about what does it leave once you get out? I mean, once the physical act of torture is over, what does it basically do to yourself, to your environment, to your friends, the family? Because you have experienced something that is, as you just said, behind a wall of fear and a wall of silence, and basically you come out and you're not supposed to talk about that.
Yeah. For me, I was so lucky that my family was so supportive, and that's not the case with most of the women, to be fair, in Syria. So I thought that I'm going to be very over it. I'm going to be open to it. I'm going to talk about the experience. I'm not going to be traumatized by it. And the first 2 years, I was okay with it. And maybe because it was still warm, maybe, I don't know. But I talked about it, and I was very open, and I had nothing, I suffered nothing as a trauma or as a...
And you were still in Syria, right?
No. I was forced to, okay. by my family, to travel after 10 days when I was released. Because I still have court. It wasn't legal. I snuggled out. But this year, actually, I had a talk in a side meeting in the UN, and I had to sit in a panel too, and I have to wait until my turn come. And this weird thing happened that I had the same shake that I had when I was investigated every time in jail, because he made me sit in a chair by the door for hours. Not talking to me, very far from him, and I will be really cold, and I have to sit in silence, do nothing, and I had the same feeling when I was waiting my turn to talk, and now I have it, and I had this shake all over my body, and I thought I'm a very strong person, I'm not gonna be affected by that, but it's so weird to have it after 4 years, and afterward I had to do this interview. And I cried like a little baby. I lost it totally, and then I started to think, okay, I have to do therapy. This is not okay, but therapy didn't help. So basically, it's depending on in individual. I think for me, I was so lucky to have a supportive family. For most of the people, they have for the woman, she will be like. Stigmatized immediately, that she was raped, that she was assaulted, and a lot of women in jail in Adra, the family abandoned them. They came to the prison for the first time, visiting them, and the father will say, "You're not my daughter anymore." Then he will never go to visit her again, and she will be like definitely alone. And it's a big deal. I'm not gonna lie, and it's affect you, even though you think that it's not. So. This is my personal experience with it.
And you said something to me that when we talked on the phone, when we were planning for the event, you told me that also while, and I will be interested in also the opinion of Pirkko later on, but you said that therapy didn't help you. Can you maybe just explain why? Because this was also one of the reasons you told me, like, it's important to talk about this tonight, because therapy is not enough.
No, it's not enough. I tried therapy, and for me it wasn't good, because I think that the therapist doesn't have the background. She was so unknown. She didn't know anything about it. She kept asking me a weird question, and it wasn't helping. And this is one thing, and the language is the other thing. And I don't think that therapy should be taken by a normal therapist. They have to be very specified or had the experience with torture and stuff like that, and have the background of what's happening in Syria, because one question will be, I'm so sorry, so stupid that will make you really hate the whole session, and I quit doing it after that question. It was like
do you still remember the question?
It was a social question, but it was like, seriously, are you asking me that now? And then that was so that was so weird.
This was the moment where you decided, like, you're not on eye level, basically.
Yeah, it was also like something about, do you have that in Syria? And I was like, okay. And it was so annoying.
I wanted to play another clip, basically. Do you still need my password? No. So it's clip number 4 that is also talking a little bit about that aspect.
Zum ersten Mal wird in der Zelle über ein Thema diskutiert, das nicht mit dem Koran zu tun hat. Die islamische und die westliche Kultur. Ein Arzt, der in Europa studiert hat, brachte das Thema mit einer beiläufigen Bemerkung über die Freiheit und die Werte westlicher Demokratien auf. Du redest von westlicher Zivilisation. Schau dich doch einmal um. Ich bin gelähmt durch die Folter auf dem deutschen Stuhl. Und Muhammad Ali hier ist gelähmt, weil sich eine Kugel in seiner Wirbelsäule festgesetzt hat, die in Russland produziert wurde. Auf den Handschellen steht Made in Spain. Die Offiziere, die die Verhöre und die Folter überwachen, wurden in den USA, in Großbritannien und in Russland ausgebildet. Das sind die Errungenschaften der westlichen Zivilisation.
Der Folterer öffnet deine Haut. Er dringt in dich ein, vergewaltigt dich. Er jagt dich bis in dein Innerstes. Was ist dort? Dein Herz, mit dem du deinen Nächsten liebst. Und dein Gewissen. Diese Werte geben dir Würde. Auf ihnen gründet deine Menschlichkeit. Der Folterer zerstört das alles. Er hüllt dich aus, bis du dich selbst hasst. Und damit die anderen. Du verlierst dein Gewissen, verrätst deine Freunde und bist am Ende bereit, unfassbar Böses zu tun. So wie er.
I will try to make again a quick oral translation. So it starts with the first person saying, so for the first time, so this is an excerpt, Ausschnitt, yeah, okay, from the book of Mustafa Khalifa, Al-Qawqa, Schneckenhaus. I don't know how to say Schneckenhaus, the shell, okay, thank you. And so basically he writes in this part, he was basically a detainee who came back to Syria and then was directly detained upon arrival in the 80s, I think, also. Yeah. Yes. And he stayed also for basically, I think, 16 years. No? Yeah, but 13 years in prison. And so this is, he talks about the discussion he has for the first time that has nothing to do with Quran, because most of the co-detainees with him were Muslim Brotherhood or Islamists. So he says, for the first time in the prison cell, we discuss a subject that has nothing to do with the Quran. We discuss about Islamic and Western culture. One of the doctors who has studied in Europe brought up the subject by making just a random comment on freedom and Western and the values of Western democracies. And he said, so you talk about Western democracy and civilization, just look around you. I'm paralyzed due to torture on what they call the German chair. And Muhammad Ali here is paralyzed because there was a bullet in his skeleton that was produced in Russia. And on the coffins, Handschellen, it's written "Made in Spain." And the Offiziere, the colonels, thank you, my military vocabulary is not so good. The colonels who were basically doing the interrogations and the torture were trained in the US, in Great Britain, and in Russia. These are the achievements of the Western civilization. And then Yassin Haj-Saleh comments and he says, the torturer opens up your skin. He tries to penetrate you, he tries to rape you, he tries to chase you and even within yourself. What is there? Your heart. The heart with which you try to love the next one. And there is also your conscience. And these values give you what you call human dignity. This is what you found basically humanity upon. The torturer tries to destroy all this. He tries to empty you until you hate yourself and the others. You lose your conscience, you betray your family and your friends, and at the very end, you are willing to do something that is incredibly evil, just like him. And I found this part very strong in the feature. Maybe Pirkko, this is something to touch upon, because it shows also, in addition to the torment that an individual suffers itself, there's also a lot of hatred against oneself, but also the feeling of betrayal and of isolation that many people talk about once they have survived torture. And so, given your work also, maybe you could talk a little bit about how you see this reflected in the people that you try to work with on torture and trauma. The mic is there.
Yeah, there are different levels through which the trauma can affect a person. The first known level is on the level of the memory. The most recent conceptualizations of post-traumatic stress disorder as one of the main disorders that can be developed after being tortured is that PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, is a disorder of the memory. And this expresses itself in the very often described state in the radio feature also, that people suddenly, also what you describe, people suddenly fall that they are reliving the trauma. And this is a state that remains usually when we go through something stressful. It becomes for us a stressful memory, but our memory is able to understand that, okay, when I was on the street and two people attacked me, this was last year, it's not repeating itself now. It's just a bad memory, but I can tell it, I know where it happened, and my body doesn't react to it the same way it did when it really happened. When the stress, like the case is in torture, is too much for the brain to process in a normal way, the emotional reaction to the torture kept like stuck in a way. The memory is not processed very well through the higher levels of the brain. So the emotional reaction to the trauma remains always actual. It remains always current. So whenever there is a trigger, like sitting the same way on the chair, waiting for hours for the interrogation, your body reacts, your body does not differentiate anymore that this is past and this is present, because the information processing in the brain in the first level, in the first time, wasn't good enough. So the body reacts as if the trauma is happening again. And you can imagine what can this do to a person and the basic beliefs about life and safety and feeling secure and safe in the world. So this remains unless it is treated in a sufficient way. It is possible for these traumatic memories to go away or not to go away. You can never delete these traumatic events, but to change them so that they become a normal, not a normal, a very difficult thing that I lived in the past, but it is in the past. When I remember it, my body does not react to it as if it is happening now again. So to integrate the traumatic memory into the other memories of my life. I have lived nice things, I have lived bad things, I have lived the trauma, and this is one of them. So to be able to leave the trauma where it is, and then like live your life as normal. So the memory level, this level of the neurological level on the level of the brain processing trauma and torture information, this is one. The other thing is, this is what is reflected in this part of the feature, the violation of basic beliefs that humans have. We cannot live in a world where I think anytime somebody can come and slap me and hit me and humiliate me, I cannot live any day if I have the belief, okay, I can go out and somebody who is just stronger than me can come and treat me. We cannot live like that. When you are in prison, you live the reality as this. So the torture is a violation. This is the second very important level of the effect of the trauma, that it violates your basic beliefs about the world, the beliefs that actually make you able to proceed with this life despite all the bad things that we hear are happening. I mean, we all know that torture exists, that people might get tortured. But to know something and to experience it, it's totally a different thing. For those people who experience it, it's like I saw a man just looking like anybody I see every day on the street. He just came and humiliated me in the worst way imaginable. So this violates your deeply held beliefs about the world, how it should be.
And because, I mean, you are working in a clinic basically that tries to support basically victims of torture and trauma to deal with it, because I think we cannot say to overcome, but at least to find a way of dealing with such experiences. And Abir has already said before that for her, the therapy she tried to go through didn't really help her. So what is like in your experience also, and after you have described a little bit the difference between one action of violence inflicted on someone and torture, what is the approach that you try to work on, or how do you open up the people to work on it?
It's very unfortunate that you have made a bad experience with psychotherapy. This is something that I do professionally, and also I study as a research subject. So I believe in the ability of therapy to help people go through the trauma and the traumatic event. But for sure, I also acknowledge that therapy cannot help anybody, and that therapy is not the only thing that is available. For example, what you described, the social support that you have received, this is the social support after going through a trauma is one of the most established constructs in the research of psychotherapy, that it can have a tremendous effect. It's a very protective factor. So not to make like a fact clear, not everybody who goes through a traumatic event develops a disorder. Like the disorder we mean is a PTSD. Some people who go through a traumatic event develop a PTSD, and one of the factors that help people not develop a PTSD, although they have been traumatized, is the social support. So there are different things to do. Psychotherapy is one of them, and I do believe in the ability of psychotherapy to deal with these traumatic memories. Trauma, torture, and post-traumatic stress disorder is one of the most studied disorders in the research of psychology, and there are really very developed theories and treatment opportunities of how to deal with these symptoms.
How open are people to say, I'm strong enough to look at that? Or do they just try maybe to hide it, just to say, okay, I just want to put it in a box and put it, like in another box and in another box, and I try not to look at it?
Being like having a psychological disorder is something that is still very stigmatized. Even in the Western culture, it's still. And so stigmatization is one thing that makes people not be ready to talk about the trauma. And there is also the opposite reaction. People are sometimes afraid when I talk about my trauma, the person who hears it cannot bear it. I don't want to make people feel the pain that I felt. They're ashamed of making somebody feel bad. And this happens. So this is one of the thoughts that make people not talk about their trauma. And the other thing is when people react in an over dramatic way. I tell about the trauma and what happened, and people start like crying or shouting or say, let's do something, let's go to Syria and fight the regime or something. This overreactions to the trauma. It's important for the person who lived something to sit and have an empathic discussion where people understand you, can imagine how much difficult it was for you, this type of support. But the main thing is avoidance is one of the main symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Because when I remember, I go back, I relive the trauma, and it's intuitive that I don't want to relive the trauma. So people avoid talking about the trauma. This can even lead to people, they have lots of pain, suffering, they go to therapy, the therapist starts asking them about the trauma, because talking about the trauma in therapy is the main step through reorganizing the distorted memories that we talked about before. So when the therapist starts to talk about details about the trauma, the patient does not come to therapy anymore. So avoidance, this is something that we should always understand when a person is not ready to talk about the torture and the event.
Thank you, Perker. And maybe I have to ask you for the mic, I'm sorry, because the other one doesn't work. And why I was saying Jakob so often was not because I wanted you to give the medical answer or the explanation that Perker just did, but because I was wondering, and we talked about this a little bit before, I mean, you had a very hard decision to take when you were working on the features. How much can you basically zumuten? How much can you make people live again? And this is now not for purpose of therapy, but for purpose of a radio feature that, of course, has the idea of raising awareness and spreading basically what people have experienced. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about how two-folded, zwiegespalten, two-folded this was, how the process went, and also what was your experience maybe with the protagonists, maybe also how you lived that, being asked about that again.
Well, I mean, no, definitely. There were many doubts in doing this radio feature. When I started out, I thought I really want to do something about this. But am I the right person? Because I'm definitely not a specialist. I'm definitely not a specialist neither on Syrian politics, the revolution, nor on trauma. So I thought, so how can I do this? Where should I go? How can I interview people? And I thought, how about searching for a context where I can record these interviews? And then I had this idea, well, why don't I go to a German place of torture, where torture happened? So I went to the Stasi-Knast, to the prison, the secret prison of the secret Eastern German police. And there is a basement, and in this basement, people were tortured, not by the German secret police, but by the Soviet secret police, and right after 1945. So I thought, why don't I do these interviews there? And of course, I had many doubts because I'm putting people through a hard experience, So, am I going to re-traumatize them? But in the end, I did it, and what I find interesting is, I think it worked because precisely of what you are saying, because there was a context. This was a specific context, and you're telling people, okay, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about it here. This is not only about you, but there's a continuum here. We're talking about the German experience as well, and strangely enough, it worked. People were, it worked. I mean, we had quite a good experience in our interview. It was fantastic. It was one of the best interviews I ever did.
Did you?
With Yassin. Maybe not for you.
Well, yeah. It helps put, as Jakob has just said, your experience in a broader context. But I'd like to comment on something derived from the Syrian experience. I think the way to overcome our traumas is to put them in a context, in a collective, within a collective narrative or collective story. For me, it has been helpful to overcome many traumas, not only related to torture, but others, in a bigger story, in a narrative of struggle and of our national, in a way, story and a global story. I'm thinking more and more in global terms. The problem about that, and I'm becoming more and more aware of the paradox of this, is that when you develop a narrative about your traumatizing experiences, and this narrative tends to become an essential element in your identity, you may fall in love of this very traumatizing experience. I mean, when we are talking about narratives, we are talking about victimization. It is no longer only a trauma, a personal trauma, or that can be explained in the terms that Berko tend to use. It becomes something collective. It becomes something universal. So we have now, it is about victimization now. And when we are talking about victimization and identities, you may fall in love with your being a victim. And of course, this is the worst thing that we can do. So I'm in this struggle now, and I'm inspired by our Syrian struggle to maybe develop strategies out of this. How to fight this victimization, and without falling in love with being a victim, without introspecting this victimization as a pillar of your identity.
The idea that Jakob and me had for tonight was to say we don't want to just limit ourselves to describing again this state of trauma and what torture does on a collective level, but to also look at struggles that have had similar experiences and how they try to overcome, what are strategies. And so I wanted to basically ask you, Melina and Santiago, from the experience in Latin America and dictators, the military dictatorship that were very brutal and that used torture very violently, what were the methods or the approaches to overcome the individualization of the trauma? How was it redefined in a collective struggle? How was it talked over, especially once dictatorship finished? So you can talk in Spanish, and then maybe Santiago can help with translating, and Jakob can step in also, worst case.
Bueno, en Chile, puedo hablar, yo vengo de Chile, y Chile tuvo una dictadura durante 17 años de facto, la cual en teoría terminó hace 30 años.
So she comes from Chile that had a 17-year-long dictatorship that supposedly ended 30 years ago.
Durante estos 17 años se utilizó la tortura como un método sistemático hacia las personas que tenían posiciones políticas contrarias al régimen militar.
Yeah, so in this dictatorship, torture was a systematic element used against people who were contrary ideologically to the dictatorship.
Es importante mencionar que durante estos supuestos 30 años de democracia no ha habido ni reconocimiento por parte de los militares sobre estas torturas, ni ha habido ningún método de reparación hacia las víctimas.
So it's important to mention that during these 30 years of democracy, there hasn't been recognition from the military nor any sort of justice or reparations to the victims of the dictatorship.
Siendo que fue una de las dictaduras más violentas y más sangrientas de Latinoamérica.
She feels that it was one of the bloodiest dictatorships in Latin America.
Hace aproximadamente 2 meses en Chile explotó todo el conflicto social.
So it's been 2 months since in Chile there was a popular uprising.
Y es curioso ver cómo el Estado y el gobierno ocupa el trauma de la tortura para amedrentar a la gente, sacando a los militares a la calle y implementando un estado de emergencia o de toque de queda al segundo día de este estallido social.
So it's very interesting to see how the government and the military work together using this trauma, that torture and violence during the dictatorship in order to halt people from the uprising and to stop it. So the second day of the uprising, they already called for a state of emergency and they and curfew, so that it's very important how they use it to halt it, to try to halt the uprising.
La primera reacción de la gente ante este toque de queda y ver a los militares en la calle de nuevo fue mucho miedo, se reavivó para muchas personas todo el dolor de haber pasado por una dictadura y por torturas o por haber tenido familiares o amigos que sufrieron y fueron víctimas del régimen militar.
So seeing the military once again in the streets after the second day of the mobilizations really had an impact of the older generations that had gone through the dictatorship, that had suffered traumas from torture themselves or someone that they knew. So it was really, it had a very big impact in the older generations especially.
Sin embargo, en las calles, los jóvenes que no vivieron esta dictadura militar han estado fuertemente alzando la voz y haciendo con esto un acto simbólico de reparación para la gente que está traumatizada aún por la dictadura militar de Pinochet. Y la gente adulta, la gente que vivió la dictadura, se está atreviendo nuevamente a salir a las calles y a protestar.
So despite this, the younger generations that didn't go through the dictatorship were there in the streets supporting older generations and making a stance in a sort of reparation way, like saying you're not gonna halt us, you know, you're the military, you've been doing a lot of crimes, so we're not gonna be halted by yourself. And that really was sort of a reparation for the older generations, that they say, okay, if the young people are there in the streets, we need to go and support them. So it was really, really important, the role of the young generations.
Me gustaría mencionar que, de todas formas, durante estos casi 2 meses que hay de revuelta, se han implementado nuevamente métodos de tortura, centros de tortura, lo cual no ha sido reconocido, obviamente, ni por la policía, ni por el gobierno, ni por el Estado, ni por nadie.
So it's important also to mention that in these 2 months of uprising, their military also stated new centers of detention, of illegal detention and torture, and it hasn't been disclosed by the government nor the military forces that this is happening, but it's happening. There are being tortures taking place daily.
So, sorry for a question.
Okay, so Yassine takes over the moderation.
Torture now in Chile?
Sí, hay torturas hoy en día en Chile.
Sí, sin embargo es algo que se sabe gracias a las redes sociales y a la denuncia de algunas personas. Por ejemplo, hace un par de semanas comenzó a correr noticias por redes sociales de personas que estaban denunciando haber sido torturadas en un centro comercial. Y cuando las noticias salió a la luz, el centro comercial fue incendiado.
So yes, the tortures are taking place, but it's been not recognized by institutions, by formal institutions, but it's been more social media that helped in watching policemen and military torturing people. Also people, for example, there was a case that there was this woman that denounced that she was tortured at a mall, at a shopping mall, and the day after she made it denounce, the mall was burned down, and it's also policemen and military that are burning down these places.
Okay. And maybe just a question on that, because so now there is a new uprising, basically, like for similar reasons that there also was an attempt to change the structure of the society and also the reattribution of wealth in Chile. But then the difference is here is that although there is this violence again now, as you said, and it's still part of the state institutions of police and the state level, there has been a moment of, let's call it democracy, right? In between the dictatorship and today.
Democracia porque hubo elecciones, pero Chile se basa todo su funcionamiento en una constitución que fue creada en dictadura, que no se ha modificado en nada. Y es la dictadura que planta las bases del neoliberalismo y de todo el sistema de injusticia.
So yes, there's been democracy because there has been elections, but all the institutions of this democracy are part of a constitution that was built by the military. So it's there's a tutelage of the military of the democracy, and also they are the ones that have set the mechanisms of how democracy is going to work. So it's been democracy, but a tutelage democracy.
But what I wanted to know is, although this has been the case, so there hasn't been a real shift, and you can see this now, has there been the possibility by the movement and by civil society to talk about the experience of torture under Pinochet and to deal with it collectively?
Sí, es una historia que está muy presente. Hay algunos centros de tortura que funcionaron en dictadura, se transformaron en centros culturales, los pocos que pudieron rescatarse. Y dentro de la juventud sí ha habido un rescate de memoria, sin embargo es un espacio social y es un espacio que no está muy consolidado dentro del Estado y del gobierno. Es algo bien variable, se utiliza porque es una historia que no se puede negar. Sin embargo, desde la institucionalidad no hay tantos espacios. Si se habla, si se reconoce, si se sabe.
Yes, there's been talks because it's a story that cannot be denied. So there's been, but it's been more on the social, from social movements that they talk about it. Younger generations, for example, there's been a couple of illegal detention centers that have been turned into museums, but there is not an institutional state politics towards creating memory over tortures.
But is there something, I mean, now you have listened for 1 hour also about the descriptions of what has happened and is still happening in Syria today. Is there something that you also from the experience of Chile, maybe then also you from Argentina, could say this was an important step, a social movement that we did despite the limited freedom that we got after the fall of the dictatorship?
Sí, la agrupación de familiares de detenidos desaparecidos de Chile ha sido quien ha estado levantando desde dictadura hasta el día de hoy el rescate de la memoria y la denuncia de las personas que aún no se sabe dónde están sus cuerpos, qué pasó con ellos. Se dice que muchos están enterrados en el desierto, fueron lanzados al mar, y son ellos los que han estado durante más de 30 años denunciando y manteniendo vivo este relato.
So yes, mainly from the association of the families of people that were disappeared. They have been fighting since dictatorship and during the transition in order to create memory and justice, to know where their bodies are, what happened to them, because there's no information. Maybe I can add also in Argentina it was sort of similar. We had the association of the mothers and grandmothers of the disappeared and baby that disappeared. And they were the ones, as you said, that there is this silence, this cone of silence among what's happening, and the ones that were able to take it out into the society and start a movement were these families that they didn't know what had happened to their families, to their children, to their daughters, to their granddaughters, grandchildren. So they were the ones that could break this wall of silence and this war of terror as well, because they were old and they made it very public, and they had to also, there was a big role of one foreign media that was called the Buenos Aires Herald that made a lot of interviews to them, so they had some international recognition, so they couldn't be
like
sort of
testimonies.
touched. So that was really important in starting to create the memory and to break the circle of silence among the people that didn't know or were ignorant or didn't want to know what was happening. So in Argentina, I think that it was sort of different because there was like a consensus after the dictatorship about regaining again democracy and to making something about and to setting the foundations for a strong democracy. So we had, in 3 years, we judged the generals of the junta, that they were that were presidents during the junta. Then there was a very huge step back because after years there was an uprising by the military because they didn't want the lesser and the lower ranks to be judged. But then there was a massive, not uprising, but there was a massive demonstrations against that because there has been a foundation by all the major democratic parties that this shouldn't be the case and that we need to judge militaries that were involved in the disapparition of people. And then since 2003, it became a state policy. So there was a human rights ministry. Every state, every province has its own ministry of human rights. There is a lot of money that goes to human rights organizations. So I think that they do have a lot of resources, and it also, as it became a public policy, in school you need to learn about what happened. So that really created a generation that is very aware. For example, just very short, a couple of years ago there was some genocides were left free. They say that they weren't going to judge them anymore, and there was like a massive they were authoritated benefits, like if they do 1 year in jail it would count as 2. And there was a massive mobilization of all the society to repudiate that. So I think that creating that memory as justice was very important.
So on a collective level, after we have discussed all the individual level, what do you see out of this discussion? Then we would open up to the audience possible needs to overcome this fragmentation and the isolation and to come out and to work on it on a collective manner, because this was a question that we wanted to ask, right?
For me personally, it's very important to keep talking about keep talking, nagging. For me, it's very important, and to just fresh up our memory that it's still happening here, because after a lot of people has flee from Syria, it's been very difficult to communicate, to to be involved, and this is part of the problem too, because you are very involved in the revolution, and then you are in a sudden alone, doesn't have any connection and doesn't know what to do, and you want to do something and you don't know how to do it. So keep talking about it, keep reaching people, and this, for example, it's a huge idea, I think, to keep having it, a discussion, asking questions, answering them, listen to other experiences, and that will be amazing. Yeah.
But you also told me that you were thinking, I mean, you live for like 3 hours like in the north in Wismar, you were thinking about setting up also like a regular
social support group.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I was thinking we were working about doing something like social support, because as my experience therapy didn't work, so I thought maybe just gathering people that have the same experience and let them meet regularly will be very helpful, to just feel that I'm not alone. I had someone had experienced the same issue, and I'm like a support community to them, to us all. Yeah.
You can also just react spontaneously. It doesn't have to be along the row. But Ferko, you can.
I will follow up on that for sure. Like something that we could do is reduce this stigmatization, encourage people who have been traumatized to talk about it and to seek help when they need help. In the community, to be ready to hear people's stories without overreacting. And with such initiatives, and for sure, we have lots of people who have been through traumatic events. They live here in Germany. Here we have lots of therapists, but not so many therapists who speak Arabic. And for lots of people, it's important to go to somebody who speaks Arabic. So individual psychotherapy is very costly. It cannot be provided for everybody. And when we go back to Syria, there are huge numbers there, and there is a shortness of experienced psychotherapists who can deal with something difficult.
Not everyone accepts therapy. For us, therapy is something like crazy people do. So.
Yeah, this is something important to. Yeah.
When you tell someone I'm going to therapy, they will. I'm sorry. When you always tell people that you'll go to therapy, they will look at you like this. Seriously, are you that injured? And it's also this judgment that come after telling people that I'm going to therapy, and a lot of people afraid of even accepting the idea that I need therapy. You know, so that's why.
Ask one last question.
Yeah.
But
how is it among the Syrian community? Sorry, thank you. So how is it among the Syrian community? Because there's a general public, but in the Syrian community, is there an openness and you feel comfortable to say that you are in need or that you're doing it?
But allow me to interrupt here. When we are talking about hundreds of thousands or millions, it is no longer a pathological thing that can be talked on the specialist or the individual level. We are talking a whole population. We are talking the number of the German foreign ministry talked about 5,600,000 displaced externally. I think this is wrong because we have 3.5 million in Turkey, 1 million in Lebanon, 600,000 in Jordan, 1 million in Europe, and 200,000 in Egypt, and maybe 100,000 at least in Iraq. So it is.
5.6 are just inside the country.
No. Externally, they said 5,600,000, I'm sure. So we are talking about something huge. Allow me to say something that may sound heretic. Of course, the situation in Syria or the destruction in Syria cannot, or the genocide in Syria cannot be compared to the Holocaust. It cannot even, in a way, it cannot be even compared to to Cambodia, where the Khmer Rouge killed maybe 3 million of the population. It is comparable to Rwanda, where 800,000 of people were killed. But the big difference between Syria and these three genocides, huge genocides, is that the Nazis were toppled. And there was a process of denazification in Germany, and there was procedures of justice. Maybe not ideal, but yeah, there was something. And this has a therapeutic thing. When Hitler is killed or suicided or committed suicide or I don't know what, this has a healing effect. When the Khmer Rouge were overthrown by at the hands of the Vietnamese occupation, this also put an end to the pains and to the tragedies of the population. When the Hutu government in Rwanda was toppled after hardly 100 days, also it was a paradigmatic shift in a way, and it has therapeutic effect. In Syria, Bashar al-Assad is being rehabilitated by the international community. So how come that people are asked to, it is not a matter that they want to go to the psychiatrist or not, Abir. It is not this. We are talking about millions. So it is a political thing. And politics, if we go back to the Greek origins, is about a healthy society, is building a healthy society. You cannot expect people to be healthy when you have a genocidal regime ruling the country up to now and killing people on a daily basis for almost 9 years. So let us not psychologize the situation.
No, I don't think it's...
It is politics, and it is not only Syrian politics. It is Middle Eastern and the global.
Okay, this was the full point. And maybe this is a good part to open it to the audience, like what can be done, of course, in addition to political work, in the situation that we are in. You know, what can be approaches to that also have this kind of collective approach that you talked about. I totally agree, it's not about individualization. And so maybe this is a good moment to, because Yassine now made a strong point, so this is a good moment to, maybe Maria, could you, great. So.
Thank you all. I remember after my brother got killed in Syria, I remember still my mother saying, thank God that he killed
allow me to interrupt.
Yeah.
This is the way many Syrians talk about their traumas. Ghayath, in 3 words, said that his brother was killed in Syria. This is...
And my mother always say this, I don't know if she feel it or not, thank God that Ghassan got killed by bombing and he was not arrested and killed like his friends. Could you imagine a mother saying this, and it show you what kind of torture people suffering? I was really like in a sick way going through. I have very fast internet in Sweden. I was going through the images of Caesar or Caesar, the 55,000 photo for 11,000 people, because when he documented, he took 5 photos from the face, side, up, down, like this. So some of them released, so you could see the photos. And then I was fascinated by the numbers. You have been into 215. 215 was the most people got killed. Anyway, and then I began to put them alone. And I put the 215, the number of the security office alone, and then 235, the Farah Palestine alone, and like this. And then I put them in the numbers, 400, 320, 4,321, 4,322. And then I noticed something. When you put the images, and you could see the fingerprint of the torture. So from 320 to 327, all the people without eyes. And then the people with eyes. And then you understand the person who was tortured, he left, and there's another person came. And then after 3 days, he came back. And then you could see the fingerprint again. And this, like I didn't say this to anyone before, but it's really systematic way. And everyone, he enjoy way of torturing. And we speak about 11,000 people in 1 year, 2012, in one part of the country in Damascus. Anyway, but somebody escaped them like this. But it's really for the first time in history we have documentation. It show us, like, yes, it have been many genocide, but this is really documented from inside. So it is very important to understand that nothing will heal the situation. Today I was reading article in the morning about a person, Argentinian, who escaped to France and he became a French citizen. And today he should arrive back to Buenos Aires because he killed 500 in the dirty war when the 30,000 people got killed. And now he should be arrive in this moment. It makes me feel little happy. But I say, this is what will happen in Syria, that they will send them back, and who will give us our families back? Or like this.
Always, when I was in Jordan, I met this Palestinian lady that she told me, don't do the same mistake that the Palestinian did and stay in your same place thinking about going back or thinking about the past. We always say we're not producing new memories, we always live in the old ones. And 6 years now, and I still think that these 6 years has never happened, and I have this feeling that I still want to go back and have the same life that I had before. And
I would like to follow up on what you just said and what have been talked about. I think when we talk about the collective effect of the trauma, we are talking about the numbers of people who have been detained, which is 100,000, more than 100,000. It can differ. But let's talk about the families of people who have been killed and tortured. And when we include this, we have hundreds of thousands of families who have been affected. And for sure, it is something political. Bashar al-Assad needs to be stopped, and he needs to be judged and put in prison. But I don't think, I have to disagree, I don't think somebody who is waking up at night because of nightmares of the traumatic event, that these nightmares will go away when this person reads in the news that Assad has been put in prison. I think We need to put Assad in prison to stop this from further going on, but it is something that it doesn't need to be individual psychotherapy. It can be turning the prison to a museum. It can be anything, but people need a way to come over what has happened.
I don't disagree with this, of course. On the individual level, so many people need help, of course. But when we are talking about hundreds of thousands or millions, I think this is not enough. It is undoable first, then it is not enough. But I am not reducing the collective experience. I am not denying the individual level. No, of course not. But let me give a personal example. I'm sorry for this. One of my dreams has been all the time, or had been when I was in Syria, to go back to jail as a free person and to see the cells that I lived for years or months. And I spent my years in 3 prisons. So, and I think this would have completed a circle. We need to complete circles to go back to the place that we were arrested, tortured, spent long years of in jail, and to walk out as free persons. This would have been this would have a healing capacity, very big healing capacity. And I was denied this. So, and I think in our lives as Syrians, there are many incomplete circles. So politics is important here because in politics, we can complete the circles. When Bashar al-Assad is being arrested and brought to court, of course, you will not stop from having nightmare, but this will help many families, many people to overthrow, to turn down a page of their life. We are breathless because we've been for a whole half a century under this family rule, and we need to breathe.
Okay, Santiago wanted to add something on this, and then I would go back to the question. Who has the mic? Okay, Karam.
Just very short, from the experience of working with a lot of people that were tortured during the dictatorship or for several years, they always said that it was really important, the fact of keeping the morale or the community, no matter where they were. Maybe they were 7 years in jail, but the community of the jail. Also, besides doing politics, they said that in order to do politics and to keep that fight, keeping the morale and keeping taking care of yourself with the community, that it's not possible without the community, that was something that was really important for them. This is also part maybe of the collectivization of the experience of the mothers, that they didn't have a child, but they weren't alone, and they had, despite doing this very treacherous political work, it was really important for them also to have their time for morale and to take care of themselves, which is very difficult and very hard, especially when you see no immediate solution. It must be very disparaging, but it's even more important maybe to fortify the community and to strengthen, to gain strength among yourself in order to be able to give this political fight, and also with this political fight in order to be clear also when you collectivize this, to make this full circle of regaining the spaces, of judging the people that were, despite it seems like very far away, judging the people that made you flee away, and also using people that you wouldn't have connected with. Maybe in Syria here, you're making a bigger network that may join. It might be broader than the one that you might have done back in Syria. So maybe that's also one thing that...
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, yeah. Karam wanted to comment or ask something.
No, I wanted to ask something. Thank you. Thanks for all the panelists. I think I have a question for both Yassin and Pierre. So I agree with the last point when it comes to the political solution as a solution and a healing process for all the detainees or people who survived dying in Syria. But I think, like, as a survivor, as someone who started therapy before, and now as I'm relocated to a place called Berlin, there has been times when I felt that, like, there is a chaos of so many demons in my head and so many traumas that I don't even know how to start with, like, focusing on each of them. Like, it's PTSD, it's survival syndrome, and then you come to Berlin, which I always say is a city of questions and never answers anything. And then you just, like, get so much more, like, sometimes I feel like there are traumas that have been caused by me being in Berlin, for me, that are even worse than me being in jail. And I was in jail before, like, 4 times, and last time I stayed in Palestine branch for a year. So the idea is, like, I started therapy. It took so much time to, like, find a therapist and whatever. And it's not just the idea of therapy being, like, I don't know, before we might have looked at it as a privilege, or now I might also think about it as a privilege, but the idea that it's mostly Western in a way. The way they deal with our symptoms or anything is mostly Western. And then I had to draw my demons for my therapist, and she started looking at them and, what do you want to start with? And then I basically started with the most recent traumas that are caused by this city, for sure, because these things I know exactly, as Yassine was saying, it's not something that could be solved unless Assad is toppled. But, like, I don't know, it's, how do you choose your demons? Yassine, after 13 years of being in jail, and now you're with us, like, how can you still talk about that situation? Of course, the point that you mentioned about not victimizing ourselves and not being, like, falling in love with the idea of us being victims is amazing, but also, like, how can we not be victims, but at the same time continue talking about something that is still going on there? And how do we choose our demons right now? Where should I start to focus on? Yeah, and for you, Bier, also.
I'm not sure that I can generalize from my personal experience, but you know that our conditions in jail were not the most horrible one, apart from the last year, the 16th, and yeah. So in a way, my years in jail were a formative and transformative and emancipatory experience. So within jail, and I was with my comrades. This is a very important thing. I was not alone. I was with dozens of comrades all the time, almost all the 16 years. So, and this turned the experience of jail to a learning process and to a changing process, actually. Maybe this helped me overcome the traumas, but am I healthy? I really hesitate too much to say this, Karam. But it is a battle, it's an ongoing battle, and it happens that I like reading, and I became a writer. So words are the main thing for me. So through words, I'm trying to deal with the old and the newer traumas. Maybe you try this.
Okay, I will try to keep my answer as simple as possible. I said before that not all the people who have been through torture as being a traumatic event develop a PTSD. The fact that in therapy you asked questions or demands that are not related to your traumatic events maybe means that maybe you have overcome the traumatic events. So this is something positive. And I wanted to say at the beginning, I feel a little bit ashamed talking about as an expert about trauma and torture, and I have never been through. So sorry for everybody who feels, who the fuck are you talking to us about trauma, yeah?
People are still sitting here, so I think.
So what therapy does, or what therapy tries to do, is you can think of there are two extremes. Yeah, there are people who avoid the trauma all the time. I want to delete it from my memory. And there are people who identify themselves with the trauma. Yeah, they feel they are victim. I am the person who was tortured in prison. Point. Yeah. What therapy tries to do is, this is maybe done like through a technique which is called narrative exposure therapy. It's العلاج المواجهة السردية. Does it to create this narration of the personal history, to like go in the middle between these two extremes, to think about a trauma as something that I have experienced, maybe the most important experience of my identity, but it doesn't define me. I am lots of other things. One of the things, I have been detained, I have been tortured, I still have the scars. They are a part of my identity, but they do not define me. And I can talk about them, I can share it. And the final thing, it can even has a positive effect on my life. Yeah, the psychological concept here is called the post-traumatic growth. And this concept has emerged after lots of research was done, and people found out that, okay, like going through a traumatic event is something very painful, but people do report positive gains from it.
But can I maybe really bring up this question, because we have this also a lot. I mean, like, for example, when I look at Adopt a Revolution, right? I mean, we are a German-Syrian initiative. Most Syrians have dropped out at one point from the initiative. I hope it wasn't us personally. I don't think so. I think it was really because, like, working on Syria every day and being in touch with people inside Syria every day and looking at the same time with this feeling of powerlessness, of changing, the lack of agency. And for me, this is really something that I feel with most people is the hardest thing to deal with is, okay, you have experienced something hard, but the lack of agency drives you crazy. And so what I saw, and I think we are at a breaking point here, is a lot of people, for example, after Aleppo was taken over, they dropped out of politics. They said they couldn't bear it anymore. They said they don't want to be active anymore. They went into drugs, partying, reading, whatever all good means maybe of also dealing with it. It is a free choice, but so people went out of the movement. The second step that happened again was, for me personally, and again a lot of friends, was Ghouta, when the eastern Ghouta area was taken over and shelled and besieged, and people were starved to death. And then again it ended in other areas. And then again people said, like, I can't. Like, people were, like, those who were inside were first then in Turkey just to find somehow any way of surviving, and they are still. At the same time, we cannot bring these people anymore here because German politics have changed so much that it's really, really hard to still get people from even Turkey or Syria to Germany, because the interior politics are complete bullshit, as you all know, radical right. So you again lose a big fraction of the movement that has been active, because they are busy, and this is one of the strategies of simply surviving, like not being able to think again, even politically. And this is why I think the question is at the core, and this is a question I have for all of us, how can we, I totally agree with you, Yassine, but how can we stay active politically and as a collective while month by month and year by year this movement is shrinking, and it's depoliticized because there are so much more people in help of assistance. And this is the question I have, how can we use this space, and how can we break up also the isolation that I see around a lot among Syrian friends in Germany, in France, and other countries, where they end up sitting alone at their home. And so I think from that perspective, it's not about, like, of course we have to fight, but how can we also change again a setting that people can talk and confide into each other. And this is maybe, if you have ideas or experiences to share, it's really something that I always ask myself.
Can I just say something? I think it is not a matter of dropping, of being active on the political level or dropping out of politics. It's a matter of rhythm. I don't follow daily issues for 9 years. This will be killing experience. And I would recommend to everybody from Syria, from hopefully Iraq will not fall in the same situation, or Lebanon. Don't do that to yourself. Don't stick to the news on a daily basis. This would be a killing experience. in order that we keep on fighting, we need to take a distance, at least from time to time. I'm still active in a way, but I don't follow what is happening now. So politics has many forms. It is not about talking via Skype or WhatsApp with people in Aleppo or in Eastern Ghouta on a daily basis. This is really traumatizing experience. People should, if they can, of course. I know that people, some young people have their families there and they just cannot help it. But if they can do it, they should take a step back from being involved in this extremely emotional level.
Yes. Yeah, I want to refer to what Yasin said in the beginning about torture.
Can you maybe take the mic a bit closer?
Yeah. Yes. Torture as a means of governing, and which is, I think, a very important issue, which shows that torture is not just a tool to harm someone, is a tool to make subjects. And it is a tool to categorize people, separate people from each other, and alienate them from themselves, but also from the society in a way. The inside prison from other prisoners, but when they come out from the society in general. And I think this is a very important issue to address, and I expected this to be addressed more in the panel, because I think beyond the personal experience and how you can heal from your personal experience, either, as you said, among the audience, that maybe you have the privilege to have a therapy and get over it, but we are talking about millions of people, and we are talking about torture as a political tool. And so the healing process for that would be a political phenomenon, would be a social thing. And for me, it is really a question because, okay, I am from Iran and I know in the case of Iran how the prisons work. I don't know how is it in Syria, but I know in Iran, like a political prisoner who is tortured has different level of tortures. Like as Yasin again said in the beginning, we have different kinds of torture, which, for example, like when the prisoner comes out is already humiliated, but also would be judged by others, how much information you gave away, how much you are with the system or against the system. And so it kind of affects the subjects or makes subjects for itself. And when we are narrating these stories, when some person who has experienced torture narrates that without distance, without tools or appropriate concepts, cannot do much more than self-victimization, or cannot do much more than saying, I'm tortured, so I'm a person or I'm an activist, you know? And which we know politically is not really something that we can stand with.
Okay.
So my question is, what are the two, and from individual level to collective level, I think we cannot just put people beside each other and like we have massive narrations, but to go to collective level, I think we need tools and concepts. And for me, it is interesting to know what in Syrian context has been done, what are the examples, good examples of collective way of dealing with this mass imprisonment, mass torture that can be given as an example, and how, what are the tools for Syrians?
Okay, thank you. Yasin, I would really collect questions simply because, no, it's okay, I wrote them and I will remind you. So there's another question here.
I witnessed a case where one was put in prison and for 8 months he wasn't investigated, or he just thought that he's been forgotten there and he's gonna die. There's the torture of the atmosphere, like sending someone, which was like my case, who's coming from a city that's known to be, or the regime said to be, that this city is pro-Assad, among other people who just looked at me all the time as one who's there to collect information and spy upon them. And one of the things also is the guilt feeling, which is I don't know how crazy it sounds, but being in a place and witnessing your comrades in the cell being tortured daily, and you're not tortured, and then you are being freed. It's really horrible. I believe there's something, Yassine, you wrote about Syrianizing the world, if I might put it in this way, and I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but being silent about what's happening in Syria is gonna spread all over the world. I mean, the Saudi regime would kill a journalist and cut him into pieces in the embassy, and the world didn't do anything about it. What would stop Erdogan or whatever other leader in the world to do such a thing? So I would say, I'm coming to my point to say there should be something like a global movement from the population to move against these regimes.
I'm Iraqi and I have an experience, unfortunately, something that Syrians are going through, but of course much worse. I lacked a discussion of, when we talked about therapy, we didn't mention the fact that we inherit trauma. Because I see it personally that it's important to have an awareness that even though for our brothers and sisters in Syria that suffered and have hard time dealing with this, but if they are parents, then I think it's really necessary to have this awareness that if we would like to fight for the future, it's actually the next generation that is our only hope. So how do we discuss it? How can we stop that their sufferance will go on to their children?
Okay. 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 We are through with the round. Okay, great. So basically, there were three main questions, or like one was basically asked by Momo about like the tools and concepts of collective dealing with Syria, kind of like positive. I wouldn't call it success stories because it's really sarcastic in that content, but in that context, but like things that may have worked that you guys have felt was a positive relief on how to deal collectively with it.
What I can think of, I'm not aware so far of a Syrian school for thinking of torture and genocidal state and torture state and these issues. But maybe the thing that I can think of is we have literature about jail now. It is called in Arabic Adab al-Sujun. So we have nice library of books written by people who were in jail themselves and tortured themselves. Al-Qawqa'a, the shell that was referred to at the beginning. I am the author of one book. Many of our comrades have written. And I think in a way, this is building a narrative that is helping the younger generation to address that experience. A young friend of mine, a young female friend of mine, read my book few weeks before she was arrested herself in 2012. And she told me, and I was really happy to hear this, that reading the book helped her to endure a very harsh experience. So this may be a bit helpful to answer Khulud's question.
También estamos hablando de traumas generados en contextos políticos, y los contextos políticos tienen una ideología y una lucha detrás, la cual el momento de ser derrotado es el momento total de que ya ganó el trauma y ya ganó todo esto de lo que estamos hablando en este momento. Como mantener esa ideología viva, yo creo que es la herramienta de superación.
that also we need to remember that traumas are generated for a reason, that there is an ideology behind a trauma, a system that wants to be imposed, and we need to bear that in mind and know against what we are fighting for and what our values are, because that it's also a way of saying that if trauma paralyzes me, it's this system that I'm against, it's winning. So it's always important to remember where we are and what we are resisting and what we want to overcome in order to change the trauma, and also in the generations that come after to keep it positive.
Jakob, you can also say something.
For example, in Argentina, just going further, there were 3 concepts, if we're talking about concepts that were really important for the human rights movement, that there were memory, truth, and justice. The first one is memory, as we started with the first extract from the radio program, that they say, I'm going to live as long as people still talk about me. So that is one thing that memory stands for. Remembering what happened, the people that fought for it. It's also about knowing what we fought for, what we fought against. So also, like, in that sense of remembering and reminding us in future generations of what we used to fight for. Then we have justice, that it's also the justice that people need justice, political justice. So the prosecuting of generals and of people that belong to the juntas was also liberating in a collective sense, because lots of the people were able to tell their narratives with people that had gone through the same thing. So that was sort of a liberating experience and de-traumatizing, despite the trauma was there. Also, there was justice in a collective level, but this is all once the regime had fallen, so that is also how we get there, it's another thing. But there was, as soon as the dictatorship fell, there was a state-led initiative to create a collective memory book that it's called the Nunca Más. It's Never Again. That it's they made investigations of all the cases, of all the numbers, of how they operated to create this memory, this justice, and also the truth of what had happened, because there was no information. So that was sort of a collective memory thing that happened in Argentina. And then there was also a thing that happened is that there was a lot of, because despite there was this process, there were a lot of institutions that were still infiltrated by people that were pro-dictatorship. So, for example, the Justice Department genocides sometimes were allowed to have to live in their houses, and they violated the curfew that they had not to leave their houses. And there was a sort of resistant movement in the younger generations that we call the Escrache, that it was, for example, whenever they saw a genocide in the street, they started like pointing at him, they made mobilizations to their house and trying to denounce and make visible that people, sort of like a public shaming that happened a lot with people that were in the military. And it also now, one thing that also happened again is we changed we used to say military dictatorship, and now it's civil and military dictatorship, in order for people to be aware that civil society was also part of the dictatorship, and that they were the ones using the military to pursue their ideology. So now it's also started a sort of a movement of shaming the people that benefited from people disappearing and being killed systematically.
I think the challenge is a little bit, of course, that in Argentina and also in Chile, though in another way, there has been somehow a transition. The transition is not perfect, it's not going, and you can see this today in Chile, and in Syria you don't have this transition yet, and I really still wonder what kind of experiences we do have from contexts like Iran maybe, but also other countries where you don't have a transition yet, and how you can still, and where is a movement that is highly like either oppressed inside the country or has to go outside the country. How can we set up spaces, at least collective spaces, again, to organize, in that sense, on these subjects, not just to talk about trauma, but also to still like prevent this fragmentation and this individualization of everyone? Maybe just as a question again.
We Syrians are notorious on the level of organization. First of all, Syria has been politically and organizationally a desert for long years, since at least since the 1970s. Then we don't have a heritage. We don't have good examples of organization even before. So we have to learn. It is a matter of learning. We learn from experiences like our friends in Chile and Argentina, other countries, and maybe the new circumstances we are finding ourselves in Germany and Europe, and the Syrian diaspora may be a bit helpful on this, because I think organization is very important for us. It doesn't mean necessarily a political organization, but working together, cooperation, meeting and talking to each other. So it is a multi-leveled task that, and I think we are already moving ahead. Maybe not, we don't have fruitful ripe fruits of this, but we are already moving a bit ahead. So just a short comment on Ayham's comment. I was referring to individual forms of torture. Maybe we can talk about collective torture. I mean, when you siege a region, and you know, Esther Ghouta was sieged for almost 6 years. Isn't this torture? When you siege and starve and bomb a region, this is sort of torturing society or torturing a huge community. The methods you talk about are methods of torture, maybe more psychological a bit. So I was talking about physical torture. But yeah, it's interesting always to have these examples in mind when we talk about our experience, our national school of torture. It is very important because so far we don't have institutions to study these, and this is one of our weaknesses. Everything has been done now, and Syria is done mostly by individuals. Maybe when we have an institution, and a few years ago I thought of a Syrian school of genocide, to study, a Syrian center to study genocide and these issues. I think we should gather examples from so many people and issue papers, books, maybe videotaped materials, just to digest, to assimilate our experience and to put it in a global context. I think one of the most important thing that we have to do now in diaspora to tell our story in a broader context. It is no longer accepted that we Syrians talk about our experience as if Syria is a planet or an island. Especially we are here in Germany, and well, this country witnessed a huge genocide just 3 generations ago. So it is important to know about the tools, know about the concepts, about the literature, which is huge, that study this experience to help us reflect on our experience.
Okay, thank you very much for everyone who were here. I want to start from a personal space. In 2003, during the American occupation for Iraq, my dad was used to take me because he's looking for papers about his brother kidnapped and others and so on. So during that time and the first day of occupation, there was a lack of law and everything. So we were going to spaces, we are kind of the first people they are enters. And we reach jails. When we open the doors, there's peoples, they are prisoners, they are in the jail, and they said, is the Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr died? So they, after 35 years, they don't know at what time they are, because they kidnapped and they think it is a week or whatever, and they don't know about that. So my question to Yassine directly, it's like for me, I'm the other generation, and we are kind of lucky to have idea about the literature, Abdurrahman Munif, Fadl Azzawi, and so on and so on. But for me, I don't feel it's really enough to this literature or this narratives. Like it's really enough. My point, it's what we need, or our project as individuals, or the people who they are in intellectual act. As you said, there is a need for centers and so on, and this is what totally I believed it, or I think there is an kind of urgency for it. But as a writing, what kind of writing, or what kind of theory that we need to going beyond documenting that and so on? Thank you very much.
Okay. I would collect the other question, but please also try to be brief, and then we would make a last answer, and then I would close. Amin, is it very urgent, because there's really...
It's very
Are
short.
you short? Really
it's
short?
Very short.
I believe in you.
Yeah,
okay.
I think maybe another way to think about it is, well, I can talk about the experience of me sometimes, and of friends of mine who really started organizing themselves after the death lists came out last year. So many of them have abandoned politics, and then they started organizing themselves in small initiatives and trying to do something for Syria. And somehow many of them said that it has been therapeutic, that they were able to deal with their survival guilt through doing something, or trying to do something for the community, or to fight, simply fight as therapy, resistance as therapy.
Okay.
So this is what I meant by organizing. It is not a matter of building a political organization. It is to cooperate. It is to meet and to talk and to give meaning to our experiences. I think this is very important. One of the Holocaust survivors, Frankl, came up with a method of healing by meaning. I don't remember the name now, Dr. Frankl. Yeah, so it is true. So yeah, it is to give a meaning to your experience, to your traumatizing experience, and because meaning is shared. Meaning is something shareable between others, and this helps us when I know that you, the other guy, the other have similar experience.
Just something answering that question. I believe that it's important to have also in the sense of giving meaning to our experiences as migrants here. I think that we do have a global perspective to have in mind. In Syria, it's more than clear the role played by international powers, and it's the same everywhere. There are international powers at stake. So I think that we can use our experience here in Syria, make use of our, I don't know if to say it's a privilege that we got to leave our countries and be here, to give meaning to that experience, and also create transnational networks, not only networks that can help our countries, but also transnational networks that can help our countries. And also we are in Berlin, that it's the center of power of Europe, and Europe has a very important role on what's happening all over the world. So we really also need to do that work, because we are not going to solve it only doing job in Syria or in our countries. We also need to know the powers that are behind, and try to make something there.
Okay. And then there was the last question about the literature, how to, like, the writing, what still needs to be done.
We cannot say, but the new theory, maybe theories, should grasp the huge, the unprecedented experiences in Syria. I feel I've been a political activist since I was 17, so a bit more than 40 years now. I feel that the tools, the concepts, the political language that we've been using up to a few years ago cannot grasp the new experiences. So we have to develop. This is what led me to two issues of mass murder and genocide and these issues. I think our theories, our concepts will benefit, will have two pillars. One of them, our experiences, and the other is to know about the experiences of big mass murders in the 20th century. What I'm trying to do, I hope is relevant to this, is to tell the Syrians about the world and to tell the world about what is specific in Syria.
And maybe this is a very good note to end to, but I would just like to highlight one thing, and I think this is sometimes, and this is something that also Amin has referred to, and I think it's very important and underestimated in any struggle, is that we need to communicate among each others also. Of course, we need to communicate it to the world, to the Westerners, to the German experience, but we need, and I think this is something that happened very much in the beginning in Syria. Then people got arrested and they got tortured and they came out. In the beginning, like there was much more people getting freed after a certain period of time. And then people managed to continue and they didn't directly run away. And one reason was that they would find a network of solidarity and of safety and of standing with each other that was quite unique. And this has been lost through the exile experience and through the fact of being displaced once, twice, 3 times, inside the country, outside the country, and so on. And for example, there's a very beautiful partner we support in Azaz. It's called Host Center, and one of the people there created a project, and I love it. It's called Hakayat Thawra. So like stories of the revolution. I was like, okay, why do you guys need to sit in Azaz and to talk about stories of the revolution? Like you have the revolution up to here. And he told me, no, it's extremely important because for the first time, I'm from Deir ez-Zor. Other people are from, so this is like the eastern Syria, close to the Iraqi border. Then there are people who are coming from close to the Lebanese border. They have never met. They know nothing about the experience of the area, for example, of Zabadani. Then there are people from Homs, and all of these people, due to the military advances, have been now forced to live together in Azaz with the people from Azaz. And they know nothing about each other. And he told me that each week, one person basically tells his or her story of how he or she got involved in the revolution, what she lived through. And he told me the increase of mutual trust and of being able to share this was something that is so underestimated because we think that we know everything, but basically it has been so fragmented. And I think listening to each other, then also inviting other comrades and other struggles from Latin America, from similar contexts, to talk among each other, something that we somehow did tonight, is something that could be also a bridge for then thinking, okay, how to bridge further action. And maybe on that note, we finish with the feature of Jakob, of the speaker. I would just read it aloud and then translate it into English, because it's kind of a hopeful thing. He says, die Hoffnung auf eine bessere Zukunft ist die Basis unserer Existenz. Und genau diese Zuversicht, die alle Menschen vereint, wollen sie systematisch zerstören. Deshalb geht es hier nicht nur um Syrien, sondern um die Menschlichkeit von uns allen. Wenn wir diese nicht retten, senden wir eine klare Botschaft an alle zukünftigen Generationen. Lehnt euch nicht auf, denn niemanden kümmern eure Hoffnung, eure Träume und eure Zukunft. So it says, the hope for a better future is the basis of our existence. And this hope is something that unites all people. This is something that they, meaning the torturers, want to destroy systematically. So this is why it's not just about Syria, but it's about the humanity in all of us. And if we don't save this humanity in all of us, we will send a clear message to future generations. Don't rise up, because nobody's going to care about your hopes, your dreams, and your future. And maybe in that sense, this is the invitation for us all to continue working and trying to think. So thank you really very much, everyone, for bearing with us on the panel and the audience, and thank you, Jakob.